Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of UBS Road to the Election, an Election Watch series. I'm thrilled to welcome today's guest to the program, Robert Daly, director of the Kissinger Institute on China and the United States at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and a former U.S. Foreign Service officer. Robert, welcome to the show. Really nice to have you here.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Excellent. So, Robert, listen, we're, just a few days, less than 50 days away from the actual election day. Early voting has already begun in a few states in our country. And we've heard a lot from both candidates on the campaign trail, specifically also around the topic of China, which is the focus of our conversation today. And I just wanted to start off the bat with you. And we'll go to both candidates, but let's start with former President Trump. What does it look like, this China relation between former President Trump and the country of China if he is elected to a second term? You know, we've heard things about his proposed tariffs on the country of 60%. And so there's a lot that's going on there. He proposed tariffs in his former administration, which President Biden has kept. But what does a second Trump presidency look like with relation to China?
I think that if Donald Trump is elected in November, you will see very active Chinese diplomacy between Election Day and Inauguration Day, because Trump has not only threatened to impose these very high tariffs on China, he's said that, like many other things, he would do that on day one, which gives China no negotiating room after inauguration. What they'll try to do is get involved with the Trump team and see if they can appeal to his transactional side before tariffs. This would probably mean something like resurrecting the phase one trade deal, which came sort of just before COVID hit in his first term, and maybe trying to move on to a phase two. China, of course, does not want to see 60% tariffs. Its economy is already under threat in a number of ways. We saw some movement with a new stimulus package this week, but China is vulnerable. So they would be lobbying Donald Trump before Inauguration Day to appeal to his transactional side.
Yeah, just to echo what you just said, we just saw a massive stimulus package being implemented by China's bank, the People's Bank of China. So it's interesting to see that the country still feels that they have a lot of room to grow the economy back to what it was prior to the pandemic. We all know that they got hit very hard. So let's move then to a potential Harris administration. Now, of course, I just mentioned before that President Biden, when he took office in 2021, he kept those tariffs that President Trump had put on the country. What does it look like under VP Harris if she becomes the president?
Well, she has said relatively little on the campaign trail, and she doesn't have a great deal of international experience. Now, that's actually par for the course for American presidents. Biden was the first in a while to come into the White House with considerable diplomatic experience. Before him, the last president who came in with real experience internationally was George H.W. Bush. So she has been traveling a lot as vice president, but not to China. I think that the common assumption, therefore, that she's likely to continue the Biden policies, which, as you mentioned, to a considerable extent were continuations of the Trump policies, that's probably correct. If personnel is policy, we know relatively little about who would be working for a President Harris, and we don't know, in particular on the China side, who she is likely to listen to. Her current top foreign policy advisor is an expert in Middle Eastern affairs with relatively little knowledge of China. And so we don't know what her team looks like. There is speculation that the current head of the CIA, Bill Burns, might become Secretary of State. He's a Russianist, but very experienced in China issues. So I think that you'll see continuity from the Biden administration, but watch her appointments, because once she's in the chair, week in and week out, those are the people who are going to make the difference.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Robert. Thank you for saying that. And I imagine on both sides, both candidates are probably thinking that they need to have a very strong global presence and people who have that type of international experience. We talked about the stimulus package that the People's Bank of China just instituted or will be instituting shortly. And we know that China is undergoing some very significant challenges on the ground in the country domestically. So if there was something like a trade war 2.0 coming with potentially Donald Trump introducing that 60% tariff on all Chinese goods, as he said, what would China's response be? Do you think the economy is able to digest something like that?
Well, the question is extremely well put, especially your last clause. If we think back to the prior trade war, China's preference was always to make a deal if it could get one. But if it can't get a deal, then China is a counterpuncher. Their signature move is mirror and escalate, mirror and escalate. Now, they have a little less room to do that without committing greater acts of self harm to the Chinese economy. America's tariffs against China, of course, are arguably an act of self harm in that those tariffs, those costs are paid by American consumers and American companies. We are so intertwined that neither country can hit the other country hard in a way that doesn't incur costs on itself. China currently has a little less room to maneuver because of the state of its economy. But I think that this new stimulus package, although probably still light on the demand side, is actually a very good sign. It's a sign that China is alert to how dangerous the situation there has become, and they have signaled that they're willing to make further moves going ahead. And even that, the signaling of an openness to make further moves, is new for China. So China is still changing. As I said, right now, a trade war would hurt China more than it hurt the United States. But China is not going to remain in its current doldrums forever economically. I think that this notion that China is toast or China has peaked or has stopped developing, that decision has been made much too early in the United States. There is still a great deal of innovation and entrepreneurship and energy in China. They need to find a new paradigm. That's true. But there are still a lot of actual and sort of latent animal spirits there. And so over the course of a 4-year trade war, the scales could move again.
What do you think, Robert, then, if you could take the other side of that? The question I want to ask you is about potential areas of collaboration between the U.S. and China, and under both candidates' policies of what we know at this point in the campaigns.
Well, we keep looking for ways to collaborate or ways to cooperate. They are vanishingly few. Of course, the single most important form of collaboration is still trade. It remains the actions of our consumers and our corporations in both nations. We still have an extremely large volume of trade. We have still a trade deficit that President Trump especially, but also President Harris, will be very concerned about. But trade remains vigorous because of the mutually beneficial interdependency that we have. So that really is the most important form of collaboration. That said, I think we are likely to see increased decoupling from both sides. And it's not because a President Biden or a President Harris or Xi Jinping is at the helm. It's because no matter who leads these countries, we really do have incommensurate interests. We really do have conflicts here that cannot be wished away or dealt away.
So maybe this is the great way to kind of put a period at the end of the sentence of this conversation with you, which has been really enlightening, by the way. What if you were sitting with either former President Trump or Vice President Harris right now, and they asked you for advice on the approach to U.S.-China relations, which is a very complicated one, as you've so eloquently pointed out here. How would you advise them to approach those relations? And we're talking everything from the economy to tariffs, even Taiwan to a certain extent. There's a lot of tenuousness happening in the relationship between our two countries. What's your advice to either one of them?
Well, I would start very broad, which politicians tend not to like, but we really do need to have a context here. And what I would say to them is that the foundation of U.S.-China relations right now, the reason that we interact with China and the measure of how successful those interactions are, has to be preserving peace. We must not go to war with China. That does not mean a policy of appeasement. America has interests that it has to defend, but we must not go to war because we don't know what the escalation ladder looks like, and we could have something that was nuclear or World War III. And the reason you have to start with don't go to war is if you begin there, the next question you have to ask is how do we together create conditions that are conducive to peace over the long term? Very difficult question. No easy answer to that. But if you keep asking that question consistently, you get to the even more difficult question, which is how do I, China, or I, the United States, have to change and adjust? So we have to fiercely defend our interests. We have to deter China in many ways in collaboration with our allies, especially in the Western Pacific. But we need to keep an eye on the fact that China is still changing. Its fate is not set, and there are opportunities to work with China and perhaps at the margins to influence its direction, although of course its broad direction will be set by the Chinese people, who have to figure out what kind of country they want to live in.
Robert, thank you very much. It sounds like what you're advising is it takes a very strong yet diplomatic hand to continue to keep this relationship on good footing. So thank you for giving us your insights there, Robert. Good to see you.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you.
Thank you. Hope to see you soon. Again, we've been speaking with Robert Daly. He is, of course, the director of the Kissinger Institute on China and the United States at the Woodrow Wilson Center and a former U.S. Foreign Service officer. Great conversation, Robert. Thank you. And thank you all for watching another episode in this series. For all of the other episodes that you may have missed or want to watch again, you can visit our website, ubs.com/election watch. Plus, there's lots of other election-related content on that page coming from our best partners and our Chief Investment Office here at UBS. And we do always encourage you to continue this conversation with your financial advisors, so make sure you're reaching out to them. Until next time, I'm Anthony Pastore. We wish you a wonderful day, everybody. See you soon.